How far through the looking glass are you when you think that diversity of thought is just a euphemism for white supremacy? I love the picture they've got with this article. Just a bunch of white people and their thoughts are just white. That's not what white people think, obviously. White people honestly don't even see themselves as necessarily white people. They see themselves as different ethnicities, sort of American, British, German, French, whatever. But honestly, I think this is because this is a writer for The Root, and The Root is a black supremacist publication, and I do genuinely think that Michael Harriot, his thoughts are just black. From everything I've seen from this site, everything is just black this, black that, black the other. Black is the mode of thought that we have, and if you want diversity of thought, if you don't think like us, then that's white supremacy. In the same way that if you're not a communist society, you're a capitalist society. Even if you happen to have been feudal or fascist or anything else, it's the same thing. Anything that is not us is white supremacy. Every so often, a new phrase emerges that encapsulates the cunning Caucasian ability those sneaky Caucasians and their ability to think. How very dare they be so smart as to understand ideas. But it's their ability to keep power and dominance within their clutches by painting themselves as an oppressed class. That's not what white people are doing. That's what you're doing. Constantly. That's all you do. If black people are not oppressed, then everything about your ideology falls apart. None of it is justified unless the white man is holding you down. So don't sit there saying, well, it's always white people trying to paint themselves as the oppressed class. There are no oppressed classes. None of you are being oppressed as a class in the United States. You might be oppressed because of the things you do, and that's not illegitimate, is it? If you go around committing crimes, if you are actively trying not to fit in society, don't be surprised when society has no particular function for you. Whether it is reverse racism, make America great again, or separate but equal, yep, that's right. Coining catchphrases as a means of maintaining white supremacy has been one of our national pastimes since disparate nations of men traversed the Atlantic and coalesced by renaming themselves white people. As people discover right-wing extremists teaching in schools, yeah, I'm sure there are loads of right-wing extremists teaching in schools. I'm sure they're not just centre-right conservatives, if and where you can find them. I'm sure they're actually far-right extremists. Or does it just look like everyone who's right-wing is an extremist if you're far enough to the left? But anyway, they're in schools, working in businesses, and serving in various levels of government. The phrase diversity of thought has become the new slogan for white people who are upset because of their undercover alt-right leanings are being eschewed by people who use their heads in something more than racks for MAGA hats. What about the non-white people who believe in diversity of thought? Are they also white supremacists? Of course they are. Why did I even ask? So The Root published a piece about Marshall DeRosa, a Florida Atlantic University professor who spends his spare time teaching his unique brand of revisionist constitutional history to hate groups and explaining why the Civil War is a result of black supremacy. Okay, I don't know who this guy is, and I don't know what he believes, but assuming that this is being portrayed accurately, and that's a giant asterisk next to what I'm about to say, I don't agree that the Civil War was the result of black supremacy. As soon as DeRosa's past became public, his supporters began throwing around the phrase diversity of thought. Yeah, okay, that might well be true. Maybe a bunch of white supremacist supporters were saying, what about diversity of thought? But it's not just white supremacists who say that, and they only say that because they're appealing to liberal principles as which I hold. But not that you hold them, not that they hold them, I hold them. So both of you at this point are really appealing to people like me to support either side, because if either one of you gained control of our political systems, there would be no diversity of thought. One would go out of their way to oppress the other, and we have to prevent that from happening as the moderate centre liberals. People used it when students at the University of California, Berkeley opposed a speech, they just opposed a speech from pseudo-intellectual Ben Shapiro. It didn't cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and to prevent all of the crime that they were going to commit. Oh no, they just opposed it. They were just stood there going, well, I'm sorry, sir, but I strongly disagree with what you have to say here, but I defend to the death your right to say it. Is that what they were saying, Michael? But anyway, a speech from pseudo-intellectual Ben Shapiro. Look, right? Ben Shapiro is an intellectual. You don't have to agree with his conclusions. You can argue the case on each one of his beliefs. But that doesn't mean he hasn't got a rationale for them. Just because you don't agree with him does not mean he is not an intellectual, and this is coming from someone who's not a conservative. I'm not religious. I don't agree with Ben Shapiro on half of the things he says, but that doesn't mean that he hasn't reasoned through what he's saying. And the complaint against Ben Shapiro is that he portrayed Native Americans as cannibals and savages. Well, do you remember the human sacrifices? Do you remember the wars and the mass graves that we found that the Native Americans had done to one another? I'm just saying, they weren't fucking angels. And he also believes that transgender people are afflicted with a mental illness. Yes, it's called gender dysphoria. It's not something to be ashamed of. People shouldn't be persecuted because of it. But it is a disorder, isn't it? I mean, don't they call it gender identity disorder? It accompanies the free speech argument every time college students oppose having Richard Spencer or Ann Coulter visit their school. Yeah, because it's not college students as a monolith. It's a small fringe of radical leftists who believe that literally everything is white supremacy and therefore everything needs to be stopped unless it agrees with them. And I love the way that you're using the most extreme examples. This happened with me, this happened with Milo, this happens generally. This happens when anyone who opposes identity politics and far-left progressivism is invited to a college campus. Every time. You do it to fucking Christina Hoff Sommers, you savages. When Google fired James Damore for circulating an anti-diversity memo, that's not true. That's not true at all. His memo was entirely pro-diversity. It was just anti-identity politics. It was about being realistic about the situation, not being anti-diversity. He was recommending ideas on how this could actually be achieved rather than how progressive ideology could be satiated. But after Google fired him, the company was accused of silencing libertarian ideas, which they did, and promoting a liberal agenda, which they're not. They're promoting a progressive socialist agenda. Damore's memo said, "Please don't laugh at the ironic tone deafness of this, that Google should stop alienating conservatives because viewpoint diversity is arguably the most important type of diversity, and political orientation is one of the most fundamental and significant ways in which people view things differently. In highly progressive environments, conservatives are a minority that feel like they need to stay in the closet to avoid open hostility." Sounds like they're being oppressed, doesn't it? Sounds like that's the sort of thing you should give a shit about, but you don't, because it's our team good and their team bad. Alienating conservatives is both non-inclusive and generally bad business because conservatives tend to be higher in conscientiousness. That's true, at least if you care about science. Thought diversity is now the de facto pushback for white people whenever anyone dares to mention including more women and people of colour. Yeah, because that's not what you're doing. What you're saying is, we need more progressive people. We need less non-progressive people. You are trying to eradicate diversity of thought, which is a form of diversity that matters. And you think that you can get away with this by just calling everyone else a racist, or a sexist, or a homophobe, or a transphobe, or an Islamophobe. It's not going to continue. It's going to stop. I hadn't even read this article when I started recording this video. I saw the title and was like, well, this is going to be gold. And it looks like I'm just such a fucking prophet. The very next paragraph, you have to give it to white people. They're pensioned for playing the victim while simultaneously castigating any minority who points out their racism, sexism, or homophobia is nothing if not bold. I fucking called it, didn't I? You are the most predictable, smooth brains in existence. Everything about everything you say is demonstrably false and utterly expected. You are playing the victim here. Be aware that you can't just say, well, they're playing the victim. According to you, everyone is a victim. Everyone is the victim of white people. So don't care when you point and say, oh, they're playing the victim. You're playing the victim constantly. You hypocrite. And by and large, it's not minorities pointing out their racism, sexism, or homophobia. It's white people, mostly, because most of this is annoying left-wing, middle-class, bourgeois, university-educated shits who need to sit down and shut the fuck up. Here is an example of exactly what I'm talking about from today, where Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk, two members of Turning Point USA, a conservative activist group for campuses and universities, something which has hosted me, a centre-left liberal, so you can say, well, they're not for diversity of thought, but that wouldn't be true. That was absolutely true. They would literally have me, Milo, and another conservative guy on a stage to discuss the issues. And we don't agree on all of these things. But here is them being harassed by a group of white left-wing progressives. Watch what they're saying.
Filming? This is crazy. So, ready? 1, 2, 3! Fuck the bourgeoisie! 4, 5, 6! Fuck the bourgeoisie! 1, 2, 3!
Do you see these middle-class communists screaming "fuck the bourgeoisie" at a black entrepreneur? Do you see the problem here? Do you see the fucking problem? She is diversity of thought, and she is diversity of skin colour, and a bunch of white, mono-racial, mono-ideology communists are sat there chanting at her as if she has done something wrong for not being like them. Fucking get fucked. Diversity of thought is white supremacy. Well, it turns out that almost anyone can join the white supremacy then, doesn't it? If black women are invited into white supremacy, I don't see how you can say white supremacy isn't more diverse than your group of mono-white commies. If an elementary school discovered that a kindergarten teacher was teaching students that 2 + 2 = 22, no one would call it an alternative perspective. If an astrophysics department would never hire a professor that thinks the Earth is flat, no hospital would employ a physician who believes that diabetes is a mental illness. That's right. And yet at university there are people who unironically believe that human beings are a blank slate and there is no biological difference between the sexes or the races, and that transgenderism isn't a mental illness, it's just a socially constructed oppressive system that makes men men and women women. You are absolutely insane if you think you're going to survive any test that requires factual accuracy. Professors who teach contrived versions of history by saying that the Civil War was about states' rights and not slavery, or white supremacy, but I mean it literally is about the rights of the states to hold slaves. You can say that these two things are bound up together, and I would agree with you, but that doesn't mean it's not about states' rights. It's also not about slavery. It's about both of these things. Because as I understand it, these two things are deeply and intimately bound together. I mean, you could look at the attack on slavery as an economic attack on the South. That doesn't morally justify slavery, and I'm glad the North won. The same goes for anyone like Shapiro, who claimed that homosexuality is a mental illness. He claimed that transgenderism was a mental illness, and that's only because it's categorised as a mental illness. Though I think that might have been rescinded recently due to progressive pressure. Now it's completely normal to be transgender, apparently. It's not any kind of mental illness that you're born in the wrong body. Oh no, this is totally normal. Almost everyone's born in the wrong body, you bigot. Don't be a transphobe. But anyway, after getting that wrong, when Coulter talks about the scourge of illegal immigration on the Mexican crime wave, she is either intentionally misleading people or doesn't know that fewer immigrants are crossing the Mexican border than ever before, legally and illegally. Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's not hundreds of thousands into the millions. And that doesn't change the 11 million that you still have, illegal immigrants, that you still have in the United States, mostly around the southern areas. What the fuck are you talking about? And Coulter isn't wrong, these are just the statistics. Saying, well, it's less than ever before, well, fucking bravo. When Damore said that Google should stop restricting programs and classes to certain genders or races because it was unfair and divisive, his premise conveniently leaves out the fact that Google's workforce is 2% black, 4% Hispanic, and 31% female, and 30% Chinese. But that doesn't stop it from being unfair and divisive. Black people aren't owed a job at Google. Google should really hire on merit, because that would be the anti-racist thing to do. You know, not racially discriminating against them. And the only problem you could possibly have with this is if you believe that black people are not capable of competing like white people. Like most conservatives and libertarians, who are essentially conservatives with beards, diversity of thought is the only kind of diversity for which Damore and his ilk are willing to advocate. Yeah, that's right, because we're not racists. That's the reason. We don't care about your race, we care about what you think and what you do, the product of your brain, in your actions in the world. How you make the world a better place is more important than the race you were born. I'm really sorry to tell you this, and I know you're going to be sat there going, well look, I'm literally nothing if I don't have my race, so I have to sit there and say that black people are the victims of white people for all eternity, or else I've literally got nothing to fucking write about, because my brain is basically the same as the brain of a 3-year-old. And obviously that means they don't really want any kind of diversity, they want dominion of people like Candace Owens, or Jesse Lee Peterson, or Thomas Sowell, or all of the other black thinkers who are not fucking idiots and trapped in this mindset of self-hatred and thinking that they are basically still the eternal slaves of white people. Thought diversity is just white supremacy in a flannel shirt. No, you are white supremacy. You see white supremacy everywhere. If you just got on with your life and actually made something of yourself, like Candace Owens is doing, like every other black person that is not part of your cult is doing, Kanye West, all of these other people who you want to take away their black cards from, maybe, just maybe, they're getting on with their lives and they're enjoying diversity of thought, being an individual, because ultimately that's what white supremacy means to you. Which is why non-white people can join the white supremacy. When they become themselves instead of black, then they're white supremacists all of a sudden. Aren't they? This is the most hilarious part of this entire article. It's a pseudo-cerebral catchphrase for maintaining the same white power structure that has always existed. No, you literally do not exist in the same white power structure as, say, slaves, or as, say, people living under Jim Crow. Things are literally different. In your political system, it's not the same at all, and you've just lied. Mediocre white men run the world. Are you sure they're mediocre? And are you sure they're white? And the only way they can keep doing so is to concoct a fictional alternate universe where they're the oppressed class. Well, look, not everyone's a communist. I don't think they view themselves as an oppressed class. I don't even think they view themselves as oppressed individuals, but what they do want is to not have injustices done to them, and discriminating against someone based on their race or their gender or whatever is unjust. It's not fair. Why should you do that to them just because they're white? Because you want to see yourself as the eternal oppressed class? Get fucked. Go and get a fucking job. In their contrived version of reality, they're discriminated against. No, openly discriminated against. You're sat there complaining that James Damore is complaining that he's being marginalised because he's a white man. That's obvious discrimination. That's why he's suing Google. That's why multiple people are suing Google. Over their active discrimination. You liar! Not because they're unqualified propagandists. Whoa, that's not a phrase I would be throwing around if I were you, given how it's the most appropriate for you yourself, who either misunderstand or misconstrue the facts. Again, I would not even go down that road if I were you, because they are the victims of the liberal agenda. No, you're not liberals. It is the intersectional agenda that they are the victims of, and you are a part of it, and you know it. They don't view their racism, sexism, and homophobia as wrong because they diversify thought by playing the role of an intellectual devil's advocate. At least they're honest about who they work for. By Michael Harriot, world-renowned YPPologist, getter and doer of it, never reneged, never will, the last real negus alive. Wow, Michael. That's amazing that you would say things like this and expect the world to not treat you like someone who doesn't have some kind of mental disorder. You know that you're going to be given favourable treatment going into almost any corporation in the United States, don't you? Any major corporation in New York or California, you're going to be given like extra benefits because of your skin colour. And you're sat there going, I'm an oppressed class. Fuck that white man. You can't hire him because he's white. He's a racist.